Hey everyone! Welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today I'm going to be talking about how change comes when you navigate uncomfortable spaces. My guest this week is Sam Gerry, who is a mental health advocate and the co-founder and director of Kick It for a Cause, which is a kickball tournament to raise awareness about suicide prevention. I am really excited that I got to talk with Sam, so without further ado, let's get started with this episode featuring Sam Gerry.
So my name's Sam Gerry. I'm 19 years old and I'm from Woburn, Massachusetts. So just a little bit outside or a little north of Boston. And I'm currently a freshman at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, which is all going very well, fortunately. But my story really began back when I was right around 14 or 15 years old in 2016. And that was when I first recognized symptoms of depression. But at the time I didn't realized that it was depression. I thought it was just burnout. My first symptom was losing passion for sports and other things that I enjoyed doing, and I had done them so much and for so long that coming to the conclusion that it was burnout, kind of made sense. It seemed logical. I tried to let it simmer and it didn't, which was definitely a red flag. And that loss of passion for doing things I once loved turned into a complete loss of will to live, if that makes any sense. I kind of butchered the explanation of that, but suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation hit me pretty hard, and it's still something I struggle with today. Even early 2020, before the pandemic, I was sent to very intensive outpatient therapy because of suicidal thoughts I was having, which is really, really difficult. With that being said, it was then first through the symptoms that I didn't understand to be the depression and the stigma that I saw when I was fighting through, suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression. When I realized that someone has to do something about it, I decided to share my story through a fundraiser through one of the junior golf organizations that I used to play for. And since then, I've started my own nonprofit, which has been a ton of fun with my best friend from high school, Noah, where we started a charity kickball tournament. And I've been really, really lucky to be able to share my story both on Instagram with organizations like Unsinkable Youth in Toronto, The Conversationalist, a bunch of nationwide golf media sources, and it's been fun, but it hasn't been easy for sure.
Thank you for sharing your story with me because I am super excited to have you on the podcast. I would really love to talk some more about what really motivated you to share your story, because there's just so much stigma around mental health, and I think sometimes it's a really hard issue to talk about. What made you feel like you needed to share your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So after I started telling some people about, privately about what I was going through and kind of reaching out for help, I realized the horrible stigmas that surround it. People I thought who I thought were my friends, I suddenly realized that, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And I was able to recognize that I'm extremely privileged. I obviously being a white guy, a teenager, in suburban Massachusetts, things aren't going too bad for me, and I've got a great support system. But if I've got everything going for me and things still feel like they're going wrong, I couldn't imagine, someone else who maybe doesn't have that support system or doesn't have the privilege that I do. So that was when I was like, all right, this is something that we need to bring attention to, and now it's not something that can wait 5 years or 10 years or next generation or whatever. It was really through recognizing the stigmas and realizing that there weren't many people our age that were sharing their stories in depth. When I first shared my story, I left it all on the line. I went into arguably a little bit too much depth about my suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation. But looking back on it, I don't regret any of it. and I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do, and I'm so thankful, like I mentioned, um, for the support system that I have, or I've had over the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you had such a solid support network because I do think it's important to recognize that so many people don't have that. Why do you think mental health is such a taboo topic to talk about these days? What are some of the barriers that are stopping people from talking about the issue and focusing more on possible solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of it is, I feel like a lot of times there's kind of this generational lag, if that makes any sense, where our parents and our grandparents grew up, where this was mental health issues and psychological disorders were not talked about at all. You're told to like get over it, it's whatever. These issues were neglected, and that's kind of been inherited by us. However, with that being said, especially during the pandemic, we've seen a tremendous shift in people who are starting conversations. And but I think that generational lag, or kind of what's passed down onto us, plays a big role. And I also think the stigmas really, uh, a lot of times, come from the media more than we think that they do. I know a lot of people who, when they think of when I mentioned I went to outpatient therapy, they think of the people who are locked up in the cushioned rooms in a straitjacket, like stuff like that, and that's not it at all. That's one of the misconceptions in the field, and I think there's kind of just a lack of education and a lack of understanding. Obviously, that's kind of a vague answer, but it's certainly getting better. Like I said, especially with the pandemic, people are much more open to speak out about how they're feeling and what they're feeling. But we've still got a long way to go.
Definitely. And I do think that you made a really good point, too, that COVID helped people to slow down and pay closer attention to their mental health. So I do feel like that's a positive step, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that a little bit more. What effect do you think the pandemic is going to have on young people? How do you think COVID has impacted mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good question. And I think it goes many different ways. I think, in my opinion, in the short term, well, in the short term, it's both helped and hurt people. I think there's the argument that oh, the COVID restrictions are too tight. It's hurting people's mental health, by not being able to socialize. So that's maybe the argument in the short term about it hurting mental health. But at the same time, there are the people who are anxious and feeling not so great about the possibility of contracting COVID, and that has left them with maybe some struggles, whether it be anxiety, depression, eating disorders, whatever it may be. So it's really a dual-edged sword, at least in the short term. I know that in Japan in October, I'm not sure what other statistics look like. And the tough thing about the US is that our statistics, they come out like years later. So we won't find out the immediate impact of this for a while. But in Japan in October, I believe it was either more women or more people in general died of suicide than they did by COVID. And that's not something to kick under the rug. That's something that needs to be addressed. And whether that's, I think it's both the expectations and standards, especially with body image and that kind of stuff, is much different out there. So it's that in combination with COVID. So it's really, really difficult, and it's tough for me to come to the definitive conclusion on where I stand on that. I think in the long term, it'll absolutely help. I think it'll help more than it will hurt, just because this conversation has kind of been started, and I think with its significance, I don't believe it's going to like die out after the pandemic is over, which is really, really good to hear. But I definitely think it both has been hurting and helping people, these days, with everything going on, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the pandemic has been really personal for everyone, and everyone's had pretty different experiences with it. So I really I think that your answer was really spot on. I'd love to switch gears a little bit because I want to know more about Kick It for a Cause because it's such a fun idea. Tell me about the process to develop it, what you're working on now. Give me the whole scoop on the event, the organization. I want to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you. So So me and my buddy Noah Dollywall, he was a really good friend of mine throughout high school. Obviously, we're still great friends. Back in early May or June 2019, we decided we wanted to do an intramural sports tournament benefiting suicide prevention, specifically the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I think it was like an Instagram poll is how we decided we were going to do kickball. It was something super trivial like that, but we kind of took it and ran with it. And in October of 2019, we held the event, and it went way better than I think we could have ever expected. Not only in terms of turnout, but just as far as like self-fulfillment and the reaction we received from the community was just unbelievable. And that's when we kind of recognized that maybe we could do something with this. At the time, we weren't a nonprofit yet. We were just like, all right, we're gonna kickstart this tournament and see where it goes. We were just a bunch of the high school juniors and seniors trying to find our way. But this year in 2020, obviously with the pandemic, unfortunately our 2020 kickball tournament was canceled. So we decided we don't want to just kind of let this year slip through our fingers. We decided we wanted to do something, and that's when we decided that we wanted to start a scholarship or going to someone at our former high school who's passionate about mental health awareness and suicide prevention. And that's when the conversation started to come up about incorporating ourselves as a nonprofit. Admittedly, I personally believe that starting a nonprofit and running a nonprofit, you never understand how difficult it is until you get into it. And that's where it comes back to the incredible support system that I've had, both with my family, my siblings, my parents, and then Noah and his family. I'm really proud of all of the work we've been able to put in, whether it's the nonprofit businessy side stuff, whether it's finding accountants, lawyers, running bank accounts and filing taxes, or a lot of the advocacy stuff. Now we're making a push on more of a push on social media. We just launched a merchandise line. And now this year, we're really excited in 2021 where we're started to kind of trying to push for legislative action in Massachusetts for suicide prevention and mental health awareness, primarily in school systems where that education among administrators, faculty, and students is really lacking. So it's been a long few years, but I'm very, very excited to see where we go in the future.
Definitely. I love that you've been able to develop the project so much because you're just doing such great work with it. Along the lines of advocacy and your own mental health activism, do you have any advice that you share or maybe that you'd want to share with people who may be struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, it's kind of cliche, but reach out for help. There are always people who are, and the problem is, who do you reach out to? I think if you're more of in a crisis scenario, the suicide prevention lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 is awesome. I've used it before, and it's very, very it's far more beneficial and unfortunately very stigmatized, which is kind of why it's kind of tough to people to revert over to that. If you're not comfortable with speaking to someone on the phone, I believe it's 741-741 is the text line. That's also very beneficial too. There are great apps these days. One is called 7 Cups, where it's essentially an anonymous counseling service that you can use for free. Another thing as well, if they're struggling with their mental health and maybe have reached out for help and are seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist, is finding the right coping strategies. One thing that I found that works pretty well for me is like very light meditation, like on apps like Headspace and Calm. Those apps are great. I think meditation sometimes kind of gets a bad rap because everyone has that picture in their head of like just very spiritual, and it doesn't have to be like that. It's just taking 10 minutes and kind of cooling down and allowing yourself to feel everything. And whether meditation works for you or other things like reading, going for a walk, obviously all things that people have probably heard before. But it's all about finding what works best for you, and finding a few good people that you can always reach out to. Obviously, that can be much easier said than done. That's me speaking from my position of privilege, where I kind of have that. But yeah, I'd say finding, not only finding right resources, but the right ones, and also finding the right coping strategies that work best for you, whether it's quick ones that can work on a whim, or ones where you can really put some time into it.
I think that's all great advice, and thank you so much for sharing those words of wisdom. Along those lines, I'm going to ask you to give a little bit more advice. Lots of young people, particularly college students, want to create change and they want to make a difference in the world. Do you have any advice or maybe words of wisdom that you'd want to share with these people who may just not really know where to get started, how to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest issue with social media today is we're kind of trapped in echo chambers where, you may post something on social media, whether it's say, for example, myself, for example, with the mental health stuff, posting something, but I know that most of my following agrees with what I say, or understands my message, and there's no real pushback. I wouldn't really expect there to be any pushback with mental health stuff, but I feel like if to really make an impact, you have to be willing to navigate those uncomfortable spaces, and willing to kind of push your messages in spaces where not everyone's going to agree with you. I think growth comes from, especially when it comes to one-on-one conversations or a conversation with the group. I think the ones that help us grow the most are the ones that sting a little bit when we're walking away from. If that makes any sense, it's I think, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely possible to make change if you're reaching your friends and that kind of stuff, whether it be educating them or whatever it may be, things they just don't know. But I found the my most fulfilling and satisfying work, and where I've been able to make the most changes, when I kind of seek those people who are not going to agree with what I say. And it takes, if I want them to kind of understand my message, I'm going to have to, pull some strings and convince them a little bit. So it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world, but it's certainly effective if you find kind of your way of doing it, for sure.
I really enjoyed talking with Sam, and I'm really glad that he's doing the work he's doing. Mental health continues to be so stigmatized in this country, but it's people like Sam who are working to normalize the issue. I think we're getting better about having open conversations about mental health, but, as Sam said, we have a long way to go and lots to improve. While mental health issues can be tough, sensitive, or uncomfortable to talk about, people like Sam are doing important work because change comes when you navigate uncomfortable spaces. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can follow Sam on Instagram at SamVGerry to get connected with him. You can also follow at Kick It for a Cause for more info about Sam's organization and the event. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.